Okay, good morning. My name is Dave Nelson. I'm one of the staff people for the conference. This is breakout session 1A, where we'll be talking about passenger growth post-COVID. We have a great set of panelists that are going to be talking to you. Wanted to thank our sponsors. See the screen with the sponsors up there, and especially we want to thank our Diamond and Platinum sponsors. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Larry Krieg, who will be doing taking care of this as the moderator for this session. So Larry, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, good morning. The program lists Kate Chase as moderator for this session, but I'm Larry Krieg and I'll be moderating from home in Ypsilanti, Michigan. Kay made the arrangements for the panelists and invited me to moderate the session. I currently serve as one of Michigan's representatives on the Council of the Rail Passengers Association in Washington. You just heard our CEO, Jim Matthews. This morning, we have three outstanding people to tell us about passenger rail expansion in the Midwest, specifically Wisconsin and Indiana. So let's get started. I'd like to welcome our first panelist, Arun Rao, Passenger Rail Implementation Manager at the Wisconsin Department of Transportation. Arun, you have the floor.
Well, thanks very much, Larry, and good morning, everybody. Get the next slide up, please.
Get the slides up here. Hang on just a second.
Well, I'll go ahead and get started here. So we all know that that passenger rail ridership is obviously bottomed out, but just to give an indication on our Milwaukee, Chicago, Hiawatha service, that had record increases through state fiscal year 2019 with over 880,000 riders. That was a 6% increase from the previous year. That went down by 30% for state fiscal year ending June 30th, and ridership during COVID has been down about 95%. So we now have 4 round trips compared to the regular 7 round trips operating per weekday, carrying a total of around 300 passengers per day. And that reduced service of 4 round trips and 3 round trips on weekends anticipated through spring of 2021. So where do we go from here, and what do things look like post-COVID? If we could go to the next slide, and the next, we'll skip to the next one here. So one thing we're looking at is telecommuting, and will there be a long-lasting increase? And it's more of an issue for routes that have a lot of commuters, like the Hiawatha service, where 40% of the ridership is commuting or business travel. So we're talking to Southeast Wisconsin businesses that we know are users of the Hiawatha. Some are saying they're going to go back to the same level of in-person office work as before. Others are saying that there may be an increase in teleworking, but we'll still need to travel back and forth. So ultimately, it looks like most jobs will likely resume in person when it's safe, but some employers definitely will offer flexible teleworking on a more regular basis. But more teleworking doesn't mean necessarily a net loss in riders. For example, someone who may be living and working in Illinois could move to Wisconsin and work in Illinois teleworking for 3 days per week and take the Hiawatha service to Chicago 2 days per week. Another thing looking at nationally is trends in changing commuting patterns, living patterns, resulting in potentially more suburban migration, or could we continue to see the increase in population in urban centers, encouraging more city center to city center travel? And then there's changes in travel behavior, really difficult to predict obviously in the long run, but there will be lasting changes. If we look back at the SARS virus, air and public transit in Southeast Asia rebounded about 3 to 7 months after the threat had abated to pre-SARS levels, but it's really unknown whether we're going to be in that same boat or not. Traffic congestion, will we see significant increases in driving in certain areas like Chicago if fewer people are taking mass transit? And then finally, investment levels in passenger rail. Will FY21 appropriations ultimately provide more funding to sustain service levels, or will an economic stimulus provide more funds for corridor development? Next slide, please. So we are planning for a comeback for passenger rail post-COVID. We're going to have the same issues of traffic congestion, parking gas, tolls, use of time, access to autos, young professionals wanting not to drive, climate change concerns, aging population. That'll bring people back to rail on corridors like the Hiawatha and long distance corridors. It'll slowly come back if, but I think there's an if here, if we have the frequencies in place. And I know that's a challenge when we all have tight budgets, but post-COVID, if service levels are slow to rebound to pre-COVID levels, the public may lose confidence in the mode. And then second, passengers have to be made to feel safe. Fear of virus needs to be addressed through more promotion of robust safety procedures at Amtrak. Amtrak is doing a great job with that, I think, now, but that needs to continue. And then the convenience factor of rail must be maintained and improved. Some examples would be reforming the boarding process to avoid people standing in lines, reducing the amount of time passengers need to arrive at the station prior to departure, ample low-cost parking, ability to choose the exact seat on the train. And Amtrak is working on a lot of these, some of those as well right now. Next slide, please. So the rebound is important to economic recovery and competitiveness. Intercity rail plays a role in addressing the needs of for small communities to have the tools to attract and retain businesses, jobs, residences, so they have the tax revenues to thrive. Supporting local businesses and small communities, supporting large employer locational decisions, supporting families' decisions on where to work and live, enabling higher education in smaller communities to thrive. And we're hearing, I'm saying all these things because this is what we've heard firsthand from Wisconsin's smaller rural communities that are served by the Empire Builder long distance service. And so finally, and I think I'm still on the previous slide, but that's okay. The importance of continually to aggressively advance projects. And if we could go back to the previous slide, please. And that's what we're doing in Wisconsin with the Hiawatha expansion. For our part, we're continuing to advance, increasing this service from 7 to 10 round trips daily. The need for this is not just to add capacity due to crowded trains, but to provide travel options into the future for more trip purposes, whether it's commuting for work, traveling to a business meeting, connecting to a flight at Milwaukee Mitchell International Airport, accessing a university, leisure, personal business. This service will continue to be a vital need on the I-94 corridor between Milwaukee and Chicago. So it's nearly $200 million of projects, several in Wisconsin, several in Illinois. And we haven't been able to move forward with the whole corridor all at once to add those 3 round trips all at once. So we're moving forward incrementally. There were issues with a couple projects in Illinois, so we're now modeling alternatives to those projects. And then the federal funding programs, of course, haven't been large enough to fund a full, $200 million corridor program all at once. So we didn't wait for these things to happen. We moved forward with incremental steps with 3 grant applications for Wisconsin's, all of which were selected for funding in 2019 and 2020. And the next 3 slides will go into that. Next slide, please. One of those projects is the Muskego Yard Freight Bypass of Milwaukee Intermodal Station, $56 million project that diverts freight trains away from the intermodal station and through the yard. It essentially creates a new freight main line through the yard. This is now funded, and hopefully we'll be moving forward very soon. Next slide, please. The other incremental project we have is the Milwaukee Airport Rail Station's second platform. This also is another project that's required to increase frequencies, but also has, these projects have independent utility. This adds an important second platform with enclosed bridge access that you can see in the photo there, which allows freight and passenger trains to be dispatched on either track, thus increasing reliability and capacity on the railroad. Next slide, please. We also have been selected for an additional single level equipment acquisition for the Hiawatha service. We'll go into a little bit more about equipment in just a minute. Next slide, please. And we are continuing to extend the reach and the benefits of the Hiawatha service to other parts of the state. Prior to COVID, we launched a new Amtrak Thruway service up Interstate 41 to the Fox Cities and Green Bay with 2 new round trips per day to Milwaukee, connecting to and from Hiawatha trains to Chicago. COVID came and hindered the growth during the first year of the NASCENT service, but we're committing to relaunching that post-COVID. Next slide, please. The Midwest states, together with Amtrak, are forging ahead with improvements. With Amtrak Midwest, the states have gotten together with Amtrak. We're promoting regional connectivity, improving schedule connections. Together with our regional partners, the acquisition of 88 state-owned cars led by Illinois DOT for the Midwest regional routes is well underway. This equipment is starting to be shipped to Chicago as of last week, and it'll be a game changer. And next slide, please. IDOT provided these photos of the equipment starting to be shipped last week. The equipment has, it has larger windows, ADA improvements, train line doors, passenger information displays, automated announcements, wheelchair lifts, center tables, window shades, retractable steps, Wi-Fi, and much more. So it's really going to change for the better passenger rail in the Midwest. Next slide, please. We also have the Twin Cities, Milwaukee, Chicago intercity passenger rail project we are advancing together with Minnesota. This will be a new state-supported regional corridor. Again, we'll create a 2 round-trip corridor with schedules that complement the Empire Builder. Next slide, please. And so, you can see with this map, it really creates a multimodal backbone in Wisconsin. And that's how we're looking at this in Wisconsin and Minnesota, linking rural communities with the economic epicenters of the region, with connecting shuttles extending the reach of the rail corridor that you see in the purple dotted lines. 60% of Wisconsin's population would be within 30-mile radius of a station and 15-mile of a shuttle stop. Next slide, please. So we've taken a very proactive approach on this Twin Cities, Milwaukee, Chicago project to advance this to implementation. In just 12 months, we have nearly completed environmental clearance and service development plan. We've gained railroad support and approval of the infrastructure projects. We've applied for and been selected for an FRA restoration and enhancements grant for operating support to help cover the cost for the first 3 years. And we've applied for a FRA CRISI grant back in June for final design and construction. And in doing so, built up broad support from elected officials on both sides, business community, local agencies. So we're working hard to wrap up the environmental service and planning by October. Next slide, please. And you can see the next steps with design and construction 21 to 2024, and hopefully service starting in 2024. Next slide, please. And then I'd just like to conclude by saying passenger rail expansion is never easy, including with the pandemic, but we've all taken ridership and revenue setbacks, but I think all of us in the industry want to keep pushing hard with within our organizations for continued advancement of improvement projects and initiatives to help create a strong, resilient Midwestern economy, environment, and quality of life. So the time is now for new equipment and stations, reduced and competitive trip times, improved reliability, and more frequencies. So with that, thanks very much for the opportunity to speak, and I will turn things over.
Yes, thanks so much, Arun. Wow, Wisconsin seems to be very thoughtful in planning for future rail despite COVID. Now, conference attendees, I hope you have plenty of questions for Arun. I see a few already, and I'll be waiting for more. We'll put the questions to the panelists during the Q&A session at the end of our time here. Now, Scott Rogers is chair of the West Central Wisconsin Rail Coalition, and he is set to carry the ball forward from where Arun left off. So welcome, Scott.
John, I think David may need to give me permission to share my screen.
Yes, indeed.
All right. It still says disabled. I appreciate the chance to speak today. Here we go. All right, can you see me and hear me?
Can see you and hear you, but I don't see your slides yet.
Oh, well, I see them. Well, that's odd. All right, well, maybe we should go to your slides then.
Okay.
Hang on a second. Now I got to be able to see everybody else. Apologize. All right, so you're going to put up the slides, David?
I will do that.
All right. We tested this before and it worked that time, but
Okay.
we'll go ahead. I did title my segment Passenger Rail Equals Economic Competitiveness. My day job is I'm the Governmental Affairs and Workforce Director at the Eau Claire Area Chamber of Commerce in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And our mission at the Chamber is to be the advocate for business, and our vision is to foster economic prosperity for a region. And given the title of today's program and the uncertain times that we're in, we have a lot to deal with right now. And at some point, though, we'll be back to dealing with some of the challenges we faced before COVID. So you can go to the next slide. When I moved to Eau Claire in 2002, I found out that there was already an organization here interested in passenger rail and getting it to our community. And you see here our mission, which is to provide leadership and coordination to develop passenger rail service as part of a long-term strategy for sustainable economic growth. And really the efforts here have been led by the business and education communities to try to have our future be bright with being economically competitive. And you can go to the next slide, which shows really where we are if you're not familiar with our part of the state. So if you look about the middle of the slide, you'll see Eau Claire. Eau Claire County has about 100,000 people, and our region around us, we call the Chippewa River Valley, has about 200,000 people. We're 90 miles east of St. Paul. And if you go to the next slide, in the late 90s and early 2000s, Wisconsin was one of the leaders of a 9-state effort, the Midwest Regional Rail Initiative, which was a far-sighted effort to have a system of passenger rail service in the Midwest. And most of us as passenger rail advocates would be excited about this, but if you take a look at the upper part of that map and you see where Eau Claire is, you see a dotted line, and effectively that system proposed a bus connection as our only access to passenger rail service. And so our initial objective was to say, as our fast-growing region, and you go to the next slide, should we be part of the rail passenger network? I mentioned the Chippewa Valley, the St. Croix Valley, which is between us and the Twin Cities. We have some of the highest and fastest growing counties and cities in our part of the state. We have a lot of interest in people from the Twin Cities accessing our area because of housing affordability and quality of life. We have 3 Wisconsin State universities in our corridor, a high percentage of our travel to and from the Twin Cities, and I-94, which parallels the corridor, has over 100,000 vehicles crossing the St. Croix River Bridge at Hudson every day. So there's a lot of travel in the corridor. So if you go to the next slide, initially we have had some success in that effort to be on the map, if you will. It actually started with a Minnesota rail plan, and if you take a look at that map, you see that they have a phase 1 corridor from St. Paul to Eau Claire, really recognizing the sphere of the Twin Cities metro area and significant areas around it. If you look at that report, the Eau Claire corridor had among the highest estimated modal diversion and ridership. And in fact, MnDOT had a hearing in Eau Claire because we were part of this, and we had over 200 people show up for that, which was one of their highest, if not the highest attended. If you go to the next slide, you can see that we also were included in the Wisconsin State Rail Plan when it came out in 2014. But as we all know, just having a line on the map and future planning doesn't necessarily get you a train, especially if you know Wisconsin in the 2010s was not actively interested in expanding passenger rail routes, although the Hiawatha continued to gain ridership and plans were being put in place for expansion there. So if you go to the next slide, you really come back to some of the things I mentioned at the beginning, which was economic competitiveness. We're a small city. We had a unemployment rate before COVID of under 3%. And with our continuing economic growth, and we have had population growth, we see economic competitiveness as a talent issue, being able to bring people to our region. Here you have one of the companies that's been involved in our effort, Royal Credit Union. They are one of the most successful credit unions in the country. They're headquartered in downtown Eau Claire. They have over 200,000 members and $2.4 billion in assets. You can see their map of their locations. They actually track along our corridor, and they see having a passenger rail system is important to their future to attract talent in Eau Claire. In addition to that, if you go to the next slide, we have other companies like Jamf Software. It was a company founded about 10 years ago in Eau Claire that now has 1,300 employees worldwide. Their headquarters is now in Minneapolis. And just last month, they had the largest IPO in Minnesota history. They have a lot of travel of their employees and clients between Eau Claire and the Twin Cities, and have said this would be a real asset to them for their business and for competitiveness. So if you go to the next slide, the West Central Wisconsin Rail Coalition has really been around since 1999, and as I mentioned, our initial effort was to get on the planning maps. But we said, as we got into the 2010s, what can we do to move this along? And our area actually has a reputation for collaboration and innovation. And we thought that just going to the legislature under that environment and asking for traditional state-supported Amtrak service really wasn't in the cards. And so we said, what can we do to apply innovations and develop new ideas? Can we use public-private partnerships? How can we collaborate? Are there innovations in how you finance this? And we established something called a Passenger Rail Organizing Council. And the time we did that in the mid-2010s, Dave Christensen had just retired from Minnesota DOT, actually a native of our area. And he came along as our executive director and put a team of business people and transportation professionals together to take a look at that. And we said, what if we started with a St. Paul to Eau Claire corridor? So you can go to the next slide. And so we started looking at things like innovations. We saw the Brightline service being looked at in Florida with higher frequencies than some state-supported services. And also of course, they already own the land around the stations, but the whole idea of applying the economic activity around the station, transit-oriented development. We actually have an example of that here in the Midwest, in Normal, Illinois, where the investment in the station area there, I understand, has created over $200 million in private investment, 200,000 annual riders there on a multi-frequency corridor in a mid-sized community with a university, which is similar to Eau Claire. And then we've seen how local management and advocacy can have a better service. So management of organizations like the Northern New England Passenger Rail Authority or the Joint Powers Authorities in California, and even the Southern Rail Commission down south that has worked on the New Orleans to Mobile service. So you can go to the next slide. So this is the route, if you want to see a little bit closer map of it and some of the potential stations. We would be using the tracks of the Union Pacific Railroad, the Chicago Northwestern and history, for those of you that are familiar with that. And the Union Pacific has actually invested a lot in this corridor with track improvements and PTC signaling. So a lot of things have moved in the direction of it being ready for our passenger rail service. So we can move to the next slide. So what we've tried to do is take a look at what could be a broad business plan to establish passenger rail service in our corridor with 4 trains a day, which is what's in the Minnesota rail plan, and do it in a way that could be self-sustaining when you consider all aspects of revenue and expenses. So we thought, let's take a look at whether we can have a public-private partnership with a private developer, an operator, and marketer, both have an incentive to keep costs down as well as to grow revenues. We've also talked with Union Pacific. We met with them last year, and they were open to a concept where if the operator pays a market rate for the slots, it would be treated more like a freight customer, and that they may not require large upfront capital to be able to start the service. We also want to pursue value capture concepts, transit-oriented development, where the economic activity around station sites can help maintain and fund the service. We're looking at the governance structure, and we are looking at creating a multi-county commission along the route. and we would still want to be eligible for federal programs like Restoration Enhancement Grants, CRISI, or even the prospective prime grants that are being considered in Congress right now. You can go to the next slide. So where we are on that, we actually have a private partner who has asked to work with us, Corridor Rail Development. We're in the process of completing financial due diligence and confirming an MOU with them to be able to move forward. They have indicated to us just in the last few weeks that they have the funding and protocols in place to help have two things happen. One is to do the next step with Union Pacific, which is to complete an engineering study to look at the capacity, the route, capital improvements that might need to be made. We have a proposal from HDR to do that for just under $200,000. They have committed to fund that. And then they are planning to use refurbished Santa Fe high-level equipment, which they have working with Railplan in the East Coast to do the refurbishment of that. They have told us that if we can move forward on the MOU, that they have the financing being put in place to begin those things next month. There'll be a few months until that study can be done. We need to get our governance body going, but those are the next steps that we're working on. You can go to the next slide. I also happen to be a commissioner on the Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission, the private sector representative for Wisconsin appointed by the governor last year. And of course, we've been watching the Midwest Regional Rail Planning Study that FRA is doing, and it's clear that the Chicago to Twin Cities corridor is a major corridor there, and we think we can be part of that when a true high-speed service Core Express is created. And finally, you can go to the next slide, which is one that Arun had, and we are excited about having service to the east as well. And we think, even though we dismissed a bus connection as part of Midwest Regional Rail Initiative a few years ago, we do think a shuttle connection to Toma as part of TCMC is a great step in the right direction. You can go to the next slide, and that's our contact information if you want to follow up and have any questions that don't get answered today. I appreciate the time.
Okay, wow. Scott, it's great to hear your about that proposal. And so let's move south just a little bit and call on Mike Nolan, who is President and General Manager of the Northern Indiana Commuter Transportation District. And he'll give us an overview of some ambitious plans for improving and expanding the South Shore Railroad. So Mike, you are on.
All right, I'm going to try to do this. Let's see, I lost it.
You've got it. You just need to put your slides up.
If I just go to my slides, will that appear?
Should do it.
All right, you got it?
No.
No.
How about now? Your screen share is paused. Resume share.
Great.
What happened there? Where'd it go?
See in your calendar.
How about now?
Still your calendar. Let's go with.
How do I unshare there? It says your screen share, you are sharing screen, it says.
Mm-hmm.
We have your screen, we just don't have your slides.
All right. I don't know what you're seeing.
Mike, we're seeing your calendar. If you have your slideshow up, you might want to be able to move the PowerPoint screen over to where your calendar is right now.
I don't see.
And then you should be able to see it.
I don't see my calendar, so I'm going to start again. Share screen.
Make sure you pick your PowerPoint.
There we go. You got it now?
That's
We
it.
got it. Take it away, Mike.
All right. Thanks for having me here today. I've been very fascinated to hear the presentations before me, so it's going to be hard to overcome those. I will say to begin, talk about planning. The Westlake Corridor has been on the planner's books for about 40 years. And the double tracking of our mainline system, the first vision of that was 100 years ago. So I know we're talking about COVID-19, and the impacts of COVID-19, but we also remember railroads don't look at things in weeks or months or years. We look out decades, if not longer, and that's what it takes to be successful. The Westlake Corridor project, I'm going to talk about two of our main infrastructure projects. It's an $852 million project that is a new starts project that runs along the Illinois-Indiana border, along the old Monon Railroad corridor that the railroad and the communities of Munster and Hammond purchased in 1990 from CSX. This is a system map that shows our 90-mile route. Our terminus is in South Bend International Airport, and we go down to downtown Chicago, and we finish up at Millennium Station. The project has a number of milestones. It's an 8-mile segment that connects up to our North Hammond station along the South Shore Line. The plan is to have 5 morning 1-seat rides in the rush and 5 evening 1-seat rides in the evening rush. There'll be 1 reverse commute. And then we're also going to run a 2-car shuttle that'll run back and forth along that 8-mile corridor, and it'll link up to our South Shore Line station in North Hammond where people can transfer. So effectively, we're going to go to full service, rush hour, off-peak evening and weekend service day 1. Travel time on this route will be about 47 minutes to downtown Chicago. We have 4 stations. Hammond Gateway, which is our transfer station between Westlake and South Shore Line. A South Hammond station, a station at Munster Ridge Road, and at the end of our line, which will be at Main Street, it's the border of Munster and Dyer. Again, parking for everything. We're building a rail yard, which is always a challenge to find a community that will host a rail yard. Hammond stepped forward and said, we've got the perfect spot for you. So that was a substantial milestone for us. Again, I mentioned it's $852 million. There's a lot of this project that is up in the air in North Hammond, where we cross over rivers, we cross over 3 different railroad segments. So there's a whole lot of structure in this project, plus the construction of a maintenance storage yard, stations, guideway systems, PTC, as well as refurbishment of 32 of our 1982 rail cars. A lot of property acquisition here. We're acquiring 138 homes and businesses, most of which we've acquired across the table transactions. Very few of our transactions have gone to eminent domain. So the key is be reasonable with the federal funds that are in here. We follow the Uniform Relocation Act, which is very beneficial to property owners and tenants. Again, I mentioned we're in-house rehabilitating 32 of our 1982 stainless steel cars built by Nippon Sharyo. And 4 new stations. They will vary in length, platform length, between 10 and 2-car platforms to 8-car platforms, but every platform we build will be expandable at the future to accommodate up to 8 cars when ridership grows in the future. And we'll build day 1 parking capacity and have the ability to meet our 2040 demands as well. This is a design, build, construction approach. So we've taken the design to 30%, and we've hired FH Passion and their consortium to be our design builder. Why are we doing it? Well, there's a lot of reasons. Some of the reasons have already been discussed here by my fellow presenters. We have about 11,000 to 12,000 normal daily riders, non-COVID type situation. Our projections using the FTA stops model is that with the enhancements to the mainline South Shore system and to the Westlake Corridor, we'll go to about 27,600 rides in 2040. That's the horizon year. Why do these projects? Well, on our system, we're looking at about $2 billion of private investment that's going to flow in. Our economic analysis shows that about 7,000 new jobs are going to be created. Indiana's a pretty conservative state. We're not known as being heavily transit invested or dependent. The Indiana General Assembly got behind these projects in a big way when they looked at the economic numbers and saw that the return on investment is at least $2 for every dollar the state invests, and probably more. South Shore Line passengers earn around $90,000 plus a year in household income. That's higher than normal for our region. We get about a 40% wage premium to go into Chicago based upon what our commuters could earn here in the 4 counties of Northwest Indiana. So everybody goes into Chicago, makes a higher wage, then comes back here to Northwest Indiana and invests here in the community. We talked about transit-oriented development. We have never focused on that in this region. It is a big focus in this region. As a matter of fact, the legislature created transit development districts along every one of our current and proposed rail stations. And that plan passed the Indiana General Assembly 145 to 5. And people ask me, who are the 5? This is an incredibly popular plan. It's being championed by our congressional delegation, by our local, county, state elected officials. And our governor here, Governor Holcomb, has made Westlake and Double Track his top priorities. Here's where we are in our project schedule. The key thing for us here is in the middle of the page where you go to see 2020, we're on the cusp of receiving a federal full funding grant agreement. This project is being funded through the capital investment grant portion of the FTA's New Starts projects. We are investing approximately $528 million of construction proceeds from the state of Indiana, and we're getting about the balance, 330 some million dollars is coming from the federal government. It's a 62-38% state federal split. But the all-important FFGA is about to be signed here in the next 6 weeks. And once we do that, we're going to give a notice to proceed to our contractor. You'll see on this slide that the revenue service date is pushed out to around 2026. That's an FTA with contingency schedule. And so the FTA likes to see you have dollar contingency for your budget, but they also want to see time contingency for your project schedule. So we've got about a year or more of project schedule contingency. We're driving to an early 2025 start for the project. Here's some slides showing the line on the top left where it says to Chicago. That's our mainline South Shore system today. As you progress from the top down to the bottom, you'll see that the line splits out. The South Shore line is our main line. It's going to run through the horizontally through the middle of the page, and then the new South Shore line is going to begin to elevate, and it's going to. We'll have our gateway station here where both of the segments will meet. The South Shore line will be at grade, and at that location where the gateway station is, the Westlake station will be up about 15 feet in the air. Here's a quick couple renderings of the project. The one at the bottom left kind of gives you the picture there with the car. That's on the, you can see the elevated platform. That's Westlake, and at grade through the tunnel there, the underpass there, you can see the South Shore Line's platform. Here's a typical high-level platform that we have on our system. Every one of our platforms will be heated. It will be level boarding so that their ease of entrance and exit for our ADA passengers. It also is helpful for those of us who want to ride bikes in the system. We have a big biking community here. So having level boardings really promotes the opportunity to use bike systems. Having the platforms heated saves us on maintenance costs, long-term wear and tear on the platforms, and certainly on slip and falls in our northern climates where we tend to have ice and snow. Here's a rendering of the rail yard. We're going to build this rail yard here about a mile or so south of the Gateway Station, right off the main line where we'll service these cars. And long term, we're going to build a heavy maintenance repair facility to supplement the one we have in Carroll Avenue in Michigan City, Indiana. Further south, we have our second station, which is right off of I-94. It's at 173rd Street in Hammond. It's going to be a heavy lifting station for us. We're going to build a 6-car platform there to start with a number of warming shelters and significant parking capacity. Further down the line at Ridge Road in Munster, more of a boutique station. It'll be a 2-car platform to start. As I said before, expandable up to 8 cars as growth dictates in the future. And then finally, we terminate the line at Munster-Dyer border. We run at this section of the line adjacent to CSX. We're building our own right-of-way. So we're going to build an underpass there on the bottom of your screen there. And the red line going from top to bottom is CSX. We're going to go underneath the CSX and build our parking on the west side of the rail system, and then have a pedestrian underpass and sidewalk to get to the station, which is on the east side of CSX, where we'll build our new line segment. We'll have kiss and ride and ADA parking there on the east side as well. This will be our largest station. I think we project somewhere around 2,500 rides a day here out of the Westlake Quarter side. I mentioned that we have two projects. The South Shore line itself, as I mentioned, is a 90-mile segment. And much of our track is single track territory. This is a smaller project at $420.3 million. Again, we've already secured our state money, and we're looking to get the federal full funding grant agreement next summer. So we've got two in the pipeline here. You can see the limits of the project there on the left circle. That's in downtown Gary, Indiana, and it's 25 miles from there to Michigan City. 17 of those miles are single track territory. So we're going to double track the line, build 4 new bridges to accommodate it, put high level platforms in 3 stations. Lots of high speed crossovers are going in, really going to open up the flexibility of the line, which is all about reducing travel time to market, increasing frequency, increasing reliability. And we talked about COVID, which I'm not going to get into because we all know what the impacts are. But post-COVID, our ability to be competitive is really what's going to drive our success. It's not about distance, it's time to market. There's plenty of opportunity to compete with with the expressways to make up for what might be a diversion of business use from more work at home opportunities. But there's still going to be plenty of opportunity that we can tap into the market. So we're highly confident with these investments we're making now, we're going to be leveraged for the future. This is the situation we deal with every day. This is actually just to the east of our Miller Station in Gary, where we go from a single track system to a double track 6-mile segment. Our trains wait frequently there in the top right for a train to come out of single track territory and get back in the double track territory. Today, we can't run very much in the way of limited skip stop service. Every train that comes out of Michigan City has got 25 miles of a bottleneck. If one thing goes wrong, it's a cascading delay. So with double tracking the railroad, we're going to open up the opportunity for skip stop service to navigate around service disruptions, improve our reliability, and reduce time to market. What's included, I mentioned 4 bridges, high-level platforms. Anybody who's ever seen our system in Michigan City, we're known as the last interurban railroad. Our railroad runs right down the middle of 2 streets in Michigan City for 2.5 miles on 10th and 11th Street. There are 33 grade crossings in that 2.5-mile area. Michigan City is 100% behind this project. We are closing 20 grade crossings. The remainder of the 14 crossings are going to be upgraded to gates, lights, and bells, and we're going to be separated from the car and pedestrian bike traffic. It's a huge element of this project. In the Miller area, we're also, which is unique, INDOT is closing a section of US 12 and merging it over to US 20 so that we can shift our tracks to the south. Here's a rendering that really shows it. This is the Miller section of Gary. And right now, our tracks are just to the north of US 12 as we cross Lake Street, as we come into the Miller community. That blue line that just came up on the screen is US 20. INDOT is going to take US 12 and divert it to the south, and then we're going to drop our tracks down at what was US 12 so that we can build a high-level platform in the Miller community. I mentioned here's a shot of our 11th Street station in Michigan City. You can see the people there waiting to board the train are standing in the middle of the street. That train itself is heading to Chicago, and it has a stoplight that's in front of it at the intersection of Franklin and 11th Street. Our train actually waits for the stoplight to go green because the opposing traffic on Franklin Street would go right through the light if they had the green as well. That's going to be changed with gates, lights, and bells. So this is also going to increase safety for the project. There's the old train station in downtown Michigan City. We're going to do a facade-ectomy on this. We're going to pull down the terracotta and we're going to redesign it. And here's a rendering of the new station. And we're going to incorporate it into a 3-story parking garage, which with space for the station and for retail. So we're going to do some TOD opportunity as well. And the station the structure is going to be built so it's expandable to go vertical. and we're preserving a 40-foot by 300-foot corridor for TOD right adjacent to the station project. Now, we always finish our presentations here with flying the W for the Cubs. Who knows if the season will continue on, but we flew it in 2016, and we normally carry 12,000 riders a day. On that day, we carried 30,000 folks into the city. We're hoping to do it again. That would offset some of our COVID loss. And with that, Larry, I'll turn it back to you.
That's really impressive, Mike. Well, we now have about 5 minutes for questions, and I see 11 questions, and obviously we're not going to have time to get to them. I really apologize to everybody. I want to focus on a couple of questions here that are kind of similar. One person asks or says, you know, community buy-in has been really important to your success with the Westlake and Double Track projects. How do you gain that support and its significance? And for Scott, at the same time, if you can discuss this together perhaps, it's remarkable that trains to Eau Claire, Wisconsin are part of Minnesota's state rail plan. What accounts for the interest and what factors enable the cross-border collaboration?
I'll be brief so Scott can jump in. It's nothing more. You got to start grassroots. This doesn't happen from top down. If you don't have grassroots support, then by the time you won't get support in the General Assembly and give your elected officials traction. They want to know that the local folks are 100% behind it. That's where this got started. You need a champion. Our champion was Congressman Pete Bisklaski. He's fought for this project for 30 years. I would find a champion who's going to hold on to this and work with you to get the local leaders, community groups, business groups, articulate what the vision is, why it's important to everybody, build from that local coalition, that grassroots support, then start building your regional coalition and use your champions to get this pushed through. It's not easy and it takes time, but do that
Sounds
first.
like a great plan. Yeah. Scott?
Yeah, and I'll comment on that as well. When I moved to Eau Claire, I've lived here 18 years now, so it's been a while, but there hasn't been passenger rail service here since 1963, but there is an incredible amount of enthusiasm for regaining it or getting something that was better than before. Even our Northwoods League baseball team is called the Eau Claire Express and has a railroad thing. To the Minnesota, if you take a look at their state rail plan, they did have a vision beyond their immediate state borders. So our corridor performed well, but they also have lines going to Des Moines, Sioux City, Sioux Falls, and Fargo, as well as Duluth Superior, which also touches Wisconsin. So they had kind of a broad vision, and then when they applied the numbers and the travel in this corridor, it scored pretty high as a phase 1 corridor.
Let me put a couple of questions having to do with the technology that came through. And Arun, you might want to focus on the, first of all, when will the new coaches enter service? Are the locomotives tier 4? And there was a question about face detection and other technology for security. Arun? Okay. I guess Arun is, are you muted, Arun? Okay. Real quick question then from Indiana. Is there any talk about going through to Indy? Be for Mike.
Well, I just answered a question that was about that online. The Hoosier State runs several trains a week from Indy into Chicago. Really, you could run the Hoosier State to Dyer, and we could build a cross-platform transfer at our new station in Munster Dyer and bounce the trains back and forth from Indianapolis to Dyer, and then we could take them in the balance of the way to supplement that Hoosier State service. So this line does open up that opportunity.
Any chance of running the Amtrak on your line?
Well, you know, Amtrak on the South Shore line or on the Westlake corridor?
Well, the Westlake to South Shore and then across to the airline, I suppose. I don't know the details.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, they've got to get into Union Station. So, I think they could run up on us across at Kensington, which that would pose a challenge. It's already a very congested interlocking plant, but they could run up CN and go up the airline and then do the reverse saw cut move they do into Union Station.
Okay, I am seeing that we are at 10:49. We need to be out of this room by 10:50. So I want to thank you all, attendees and panelists alike. I think this has been a lot of fun and we've learned a lot. So please, I think Dave will tell us we need to sign off to get out of this room so they can set it up for the next session.
I will end the session and you will go away.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you to everybody.